Good morning, Dan and Amy. And the more you look at this complicated picture in Syria, the more I'm persuaded, at least, by what Jeffrey Sachs had to say, particularly given some of our conversations with policy experts in this space on Syria, Amy, where you have them conceding that we are continuing to pursue this hybrid strategy, they generously call it, that we've been pursuing for 7 years. We're not trying to engage in regime change, but we're trying to defend the red line that Obama drew.
We're trying to defend innocent civilians who are being gassed.
And the net of this is what? 500,000 dead, 10 million displaced. Jeffrey Sachs, Columbia University professor and advisor to the UN on Morning Joe, talking about Trump's instincts on Syria were right in the first place before he got persuaded by the permanent state.
This is a U.S. mistake that started 7 years ago. And I remember the day on your show when President Obama said, Assad must go. And I looked at you and Joe and I said, how's he going to do that? Where's the policy for that?
Right.
And we know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia. So we have been digging deeper and deeper and deeper. What we should do now is get out and not continue to throw missiles, not have a confrontation with Russia. 7 years has been a disaster under Obama, continuing under Trump. This is what I would call the permanent state. This is the CIA, this is Pentagon, wanting to keep Iran and Russia out of Syria, but no way to do that. And so we have made a proxy war in Syria. It's killed 500,000 people, displaced 10 million. And I'll say predictably so, because I predicted it 7 years ago that there was no way to do this and that it would make a complete chaos. So what I would plead to President Trump is get out. Like his instinct told him, by the way. That was his instinct. But then all the establishment, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pentagon, everybody said, no, that's irresponsible. But his instinct is right. Get out.
For reaction and insight on this topic and others, we're pleased to be joined again by David French. He is a writer at National Review, constitutional lawyer, author, and also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. David, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, by the way, you were in Chicago last week for the Buckley event, right?
Yes, I was.
How did that go?
Where it went from about 70 degrees to about 40.
Oh, welcome to our
Just
world.
Yes,
a few hours.
exactly. That's why everybody's moving to Franklin, Tennessee to be near you, David.
That's right.
So what about what Jeffrey Sachs had to say about the Syrian situation and your reaction to the strike on those three chemical facilities on Friday night?
Well, first on the strike, I think it was unconstitutional and ineffective. Unconstitutional in the sense that you're striking a sovereign country without a vote by Congress. That's an act of war. Only Congress has the ability to declare war under our Constitution. Ineffective in that, what you're doing is you're just giving Assad pinpricks. I mean, he's lost tens of thousands of troops over the course of this war. And besides, his main striking power rests in Russia and Iran anyway. It does nothing to him. It's a gesture it's more like a temper tantrum with cruise missiles. So I thought that was ineffective and unconstitutional. As far as the rest of the policy, I have to disagree strongly with Jeffrey Sachs. We have carved out a part of Syria in the north with the aid of our allies that is stabilizing at this very moment, that has suppressed ISIS. And if you get out, as Sachs says, what you do is you create a power vacuum. You create a power vacuum in the same way that Obama did when he got out of Iraq in 2011. And when you create that power vacuum, you always have to ask, who fills it? Who fills the power vacuum? And right now, ISIS is suppressed, but not completely gone. The likely candidates for filling that power vacuum are all of them enemies of the United States. And what you do is you abandon your allies. You abandon allies who have fought beside your own troops, who have bled and died in large numbers. This was a war in northern Syria, remember, where America did not commit large numbers of troops. Where these guys fought hard with our support, and then to pull away from them at this moment would be a betrayal of the highest order that would benefit Iran, benefit Russia, potentially benefit the remnants of ISIS. I just don't think that's in American national interest.
So let me just understand, though, what you're suggesting we do. So American troops, in conjunction with the Turks, continue to eradicate ISIS in northern Syria, but are we to push on to Damascus and depose Assad?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, not at all. This is not a war against Assad. This is a war against ISIS.
Okay.
So what people have to realize is that Assad left the war against ISIS to us. A lot of people, there's some misinformation out there that says that Russia and Assad also fought ISIS. Maybe a little bit, but they mainly fought the domestic rebels that were our allies, and they left the fight against ISIS to us. And so what would happen if you unilaterally withdraw is you give away your biggest bargaining chip in any sort of permanent peace settlement in Syria. So, no, I don't think you try to depose Assad. I think that, Assad has won his civil war. He has essentially, he's now essentially in control of the major populated areas of Syria. There are a few little pockets left. I mean, he's won. He has Russian help. He has Iranian help. You don't try to undo the results of that war. Sometimes people win wars, and that has an effect.
All right,
but we've also won our war in northern Syria, and you don't unwin that war. You don't recreate the Obama mistake of 2011.
But what if Assad continues to use his chemical weapons? I mean, they said they denied it, but we have UN weapons inspectors there on the ground. They have been since Saturday, and they've been not allowed to get into that site in Douma. They said that they can come by Wednesday or Thursday, and by that time, all the evidence will be cleaned up.
I have to say, I think the use of chemical weapons is unconscionable. So it's carpet bombing civilians. So it's barrel bombing civilians. So it's shooting them, rounding them up and shooting them. 500,000 people have died. There have been mass murder after mass murder in this war. One of the things that I think is actually happening is that Assad's incentive to use chemical weapons is winding down, in part because his war is winding down. This idea that we're not going to intervene when 2,000 civilians die in carpet bombings, we are going to intervene when 50 civilians die in a chemical attack, I think, to me, seems to be a little bit odd. The civilians who are killed in carpet bombings and cluster bombings and barrel bombings are just as dead as the civilians killed by chemical attacks. The problem is when you do that, when you're doing what we're doing, there's no real strategy there. It's a tit for tat, and what happens is when the world's most powerful country takes a swing at somebody and the person lives, when you strike a dictator and the dictator survives, you're often not deterring that dictator. You're often emboldening the dictator. And if you're going to hit this dictator hard enough to really hurt him, well, then you have to hit the Russians and the Iranians, because they're the root of his power. And we're not ready for that. The American people are not ready for a conflict with Russia over Syria. So, there are military realities on the ground that dictate that he's won his war. And if we're going to take on a sovereign nation like that, we got to go to Congress and we got to explain a strategy. And you got to justify to the American people the risks of a great power conflict. And Trump hasn't done that. He can't really do that.
I want to switch gears. I know you wrote on the topic of Jim Comey, but I wonder if you were as specifically moved by the poignant recollection of his last flight on the FBI's private plane and the last Jim Beam and Coke he'll have on that plane.
At the wet bar, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that Jim Comey really admires Jim Comey.
Right.
Enough about me. What do you think of me?
No, it's David. Now, just point of order on that. He was asked by Stephanopoulos he ever thought his own sense of his virtue got in the way, and he reflected on that and concluded it did not. So that's case closed.
Case closed. Yeah, one of the things that was really interesting about that interview, and I wrote about this, was that, so he talks about how the FBI was in a no-win position, which in a lot of ways is true. When the two major parties nominate two candidates who richly deserve FBI investigations, it puts the FBI in a tough spot. But then he said, here's what we need to do is we need to look at the law and we need to look at the facts, which is the right answer. But then he spent the rest of the time talking about how he looked at things that weren't the law and he looked at things that weren't the facts. So he talked about the Hillary Clinton email investigation, and he talked about how he did not apply the actual law. He talked about how he applied a different legal standard, one that doesn't exist, a higher legal standard that allowed her to escape a charging recommendation from the FBI. And then when he talked about how he held these unprecedented news conferences and issued his unprecedented letter, that he was considering things like, the public credibility of the FBI. Well, that's not the law, that's not the facts. He did not apply the law to the facts, and that was the original sin here of the Hillary Clinton email investigation.
Is the big takeaway of this guy? He's just a political animal, and like all the other political animals in D.C., he doesn't have principles. He has interests, and so as his interests move, so do his principles.
I think, like a lot of people, he began to look at the health of his institution, the FBI, as his principal job, and that's shown through in the interview. That time and time again, he's looking out for the credibility of the FBI, the credibility of the FBI. And you know how the FBI builds its credibility? By applying the law to the facts. That's how the FBI builds its credibility, not by looking out for itself. And that's the thing that really stuck out to me, was how much he was looking out for the FBI. And that's not the FBI's job. And that's why it was, I think, the interview with Stephanopoulos was a disaster for him.
He is David French. He's a writer at National Review. The latest piece on Comey, James Comey, confirms once again that he failed America in 2016. You can find it at nationalreview.com. Constitutional lawyer, author, veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. David, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening.